Welcome, everyone. I'm Gordon Porter, the Executive Director of Inclusive Education Canada, and I want to thank you for joining us for this session. We're delighted to welcome you to this webinar hosted by Inclusive Education Canada. As you may know, February is Inclusive Education Month in our country, and throughout the month, IEC and often provincial territorial associations for community living or inclusion uh, hold events and share stories and information about inclusive education. Our association, our group is sharing stories, resources, practical information throughout the month, posting on our social media, and we hope you're following along. And we put things out that are relevant to both parents and educators and try to promote inclusion in our schools across the country. Inclusive Education Canada works nationally to advance inclusive education so that all children can belong, be valued, and learn together in their neighborhood schools. We encourage you to check out our website and follow us on social media when we're posting materials, reflections, and events like the one tonight. Today's webinar features three parents who will share positive reasons that they've worked to have their child included. These lived experiences are at the heart of inclusive education. I'm now pleased to turn things over to Andrea Cameron, a parent, a teacher, and a passionate advocate for inclusion, who's been a wonderful addition to our Inclusive Education Canada team this year. Andrea will guide us through tonight's conversation with the three parents who are our guests. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Gordon. Welcome, everyone, and happy National Inclusive Education Month. As Gordon said, my name is Andrea Cameron. I'm the Executive Director of Inclusive Education Initiatives for Inclusion Canada, and I'm excited to talk to parents tonight about inclusive education. We hear a lot of stories about how difficult it is to access inclusion for students, or how inclusion isn't working, or how ableist attitudes in our schools are preventing children with disabilities from exploring their potential. And all of this is true, and it would be naive to say we're celebrating inclusive education at the finish line, that the work is finished. No, we're in a long distance run. And some of us have pulled a muscle, some are feeling dehydrated, and we all can sense the blisters forming on our feet. But we have been training for this, though. We have a great foundation in the work of researchers, advocates, teachers, families, and the students themselves. And this is hard work. The system still creates barriers against students with disabilities. Our children with disabilities still frequently encounter ableism and low expectations. And many families are still fighting to get their kids just through the door of their neighborhood schools. So we acknowledge that and we hear you. But despite all of that, there are successes, and that says so much because good things are happening. We have abundant research to support inclusive education as the best path forward to benefit the most students. The professors and instructors of future teachers and educational assistants are teaching inclusive approaches. We have stories like what Donna, Andrew, and Martha are going to share with us this evening. Positive stories, but not perfect stories. And it's through those positive stories, those positive experiences, when things work, that we learn how to move forward. And I hope families can hold on to these stories as they advocate for their children. And I hope educators can imagine the possibilities. There are families, students, classmates, teachers, and administrators working together to make inclusion real. And when everyone works together, inclusive education strengthens our classrooms by improving the learning opportunities for all students. We know that students with disabilities are an integral part of our education system, and that strong education system is the foundation of healthy communities. But when we encounter challenges, often exclusion becomes the default. We hear things like, back in my day, those kids were sent to special classes. Or isn't there some place to send kids like that? Isn't there a place where those students can get what they need? But the truth is, there was never a golden age where students with disabilities received a quality education. There's no good old days for kids with disabilities. Their hope lies in looking ahead to the future of inclusive education, not recycling what was done in the past or perpetuating those harms and lost opportunities. And as our Prime Minister said, nostalgia is not a strategy. We're not going back. We do not accept the harm of exclusion any longer. We're making something new and better, and that's something to be optimistic about. And families, like the families here tonight and the families listening, are leading the way. So first, I'm going to thank everyone for coming tonight to share their stories with us. It's so appreciated and it's so important because as a parent myself, my son had an inclusive education, and I know how important these stories were to me in navigating the system for him and in finding allies and like-minded people to help us. And we did find those people. They're there, right? So I think that's a really important message for parents to hear. We're not ignoring the challenges, but we're really celebrating the positive things that we can find in our schools. So we can kind of do both things. We can acknowledge the challenges and celebrate the wins. So first tonight we have Donna Vanderkloot to speak to us. Donna is mom of 5 children, the youngest of whom has Down syndrome. She has a background in family support and currently teaches at the college level in a developmental support worker program. She's active in her local special education advisory council. So for those not in Ontario, the acronym is SEAC, and serves on the board of Legacy Homes, Inclusion Action in Ontario, and the Southern Ontario Training Group. Recently, she's been part of the founding of a parent network in the Quinte region. So Donna, thank you for coming tonight to talk to us. And so sort of my first question to you is if you can tell us about your son and a little bit about his inclusive education experience or his education experience in general.
Sure. So thanks for having me. So Sam is 13. Sam's in grade 8. And we've, ever since he was born, we've really rejected the whole notion that he belongs somewhere else. And so he's really a pretty typical kid. He's had a pretty typical life, does what all my other children did. He's just a teenager. In terms of, he likes music, he's a drummer. He likes all kind of music, all kinds of instruments. He likes sports. He does lots of sports. Basketball is his big thing at the moment. And he likes to travel. He likes to go places and do lots of things. He does have, some support needs. And so that's worth noting that, there are Down syndrome, his Down syndrome does affect him, and primarily in terms of his speech. So he's very limited in his verbal speech. And what he can say is quite hard for others to understand. So that does pose a challenge to school. And he does have an intellectual impairment, though we've never really formally had that assessed. But his school experience has been inclusive from the beginning. So he's in a regular grade 8 classroom, and he's been in a regular class his whole schooling. He doesn't have any alternative programming. So he is in class, in every class, learning from the curriculum, modified to how it fits for him. So in some classes, he's working at grade 8 level, and in other classes, he's working significantly below grade level. He loves French. We left him in core French, and he's really enjoyed his French experience. But he also does lots of extracurriculars. So he's in the drum corps, and he's in the marching band, and he runs cross country and relay. And another kind of important part of school is he takes part in the class trips, and that takes some doing sometimes, but he's always been included in class trips. And the year-end trip this spring is a 3-day trip to Quebec City, and he'll be going and doing that as well. So.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I know for us, school trips were sometimes, they did take a little bit of extra planning. And when we were able to make it work, it was always really rewarding. And even sometimes if it looked a little bit different, like if my son, say, a trampoline park and maybe could tolerate the noise in there for less time, we still went, right? We still made sure that he had the opportunity. So that's so important. And so I was wondering, like, as you're talking about these really rich, exciting experiences he's having, like, not necessarily naming names, but who were the allies who helped you like open these doors?
Sure. So I was really lucky because I worked with parents before I had Sam. So I've had, in a big way, I've had lots of parent mentors and allies that way. But in terms of his day-to-day life, we were really lucky in that in the third grade, at the end of third grade, just when they were starting to talk about alternative programming for Sam, outside of the curriculum, we met a really wonderful EA who was assigned to Sam. And it wasn't so much, what she does, but it's about how she thinks and what she believes. And so she has always believed from day one that, Sam had things to say, even when it was hard to figure out what he was saying, but that he had something that needed to be heard. She believed he could learn academically. She believed that his place was in the classroom. And she just worked really, really hard from the outset to get to know who he was. And that meant communicating with home. She was really open to really extensive, like two-way communication with home until she really felt confident she understood him. And then once she knew what he was capable of and could help him show what he was capable of, she started rolling that out to teachers. And so, one teacher at a time saw what he could do because she was able to help him show what he could do. And that's just had a ripple effect, right? Year after year, people have seen what he's capable of in the same school. And that's changed people's perspective, right? That's almost every teacher Sam's had has told me in one way or another that they've learned from having Sam in their class, and their perspective has changed. So it's really been, even just one person having the right mindset around disability and seeing a kid's potential has made the difference for us.
Yeah, Donna, as you're talking about that, the importance of having the EA, it doesn't matter who it is, but having someone believe in your child, and that becomes like a pathway to connecting with others. So, our like myself, we had some wonderful experiences and people who did the similar thing, but then something might change and you lose that person. Do you have any advice for families what to do when, say, even you change school years, you get a new teacher or principal changes or there's an EA change? And it was going really well. Do you have any advice for how to navigate that? If
Yeah,
it,
so we experienced just that. We had in Sam's grade 7 year, so he had that same EA from grade 4 to grade 7, and in grade 7, that was there was a change, right, and systems change and staffing changes, and so he didn't have that same EA, and that was a very, very difficult year. There was a lot of change. I think Sam had about 6 different EAs over the course of that year. For somebody who doesn't talk and is difficult to understand, that they didn't have a chance really to get to know him, and that was really challenging. It was he wasn't happy. The teacher, I think his teacher at that point was just, I don't know why this kid's in my class, because he couldn't see any potential in him. So, I mean, we advocated hard about, that he really needed to have somebody who could understand him very well, and that we didn't accept that was who he really was. We said, this is a really difficult year behaviorally and academically, but we know he can do better. And I think because the school had seen him do better, so by grade 8, what happened, I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But when we started grade 8 this year, that EA was back with him. And he's had he had the same teacher for grade 8. And it's been quite amazing to see the change in his perspective, because all of a sudden this year he sees what he looks like when he's well understood, right? And so I had our parent teacher meeting this year was that same teacher who I really felt was perplexed at what he was supposed to do with this kid in his grade 7 classroom, is showing me all the academic work he's doing, and it was a totally different experience. So I mean, I think it just took some consistent not accepting this as good enough, right? This isn't good enough. Grade 7 wasn't good enough. We have to get it back to where it was.
Wow, that's so important, that story. And I think that we see that power when we model, like, so you had that model of what your son is capable of. And then all of a sudden we see when the change happens and those opportunities and progress appear to be lost, right? So I think that's and what we're doing now by sharing our stories is for families maybe who don't have those examples, giving those examples, and also the teachers see it too, right? The others, and most importantly, the other kids see it. The kids see how other adults are showing up for the child, and then they see this peer as a valued learner, and it has that ripple effect. So what would be one thing, like you brought up the experience with, the teacher and learning about your son over time and expectations increasing. So what's one thing that if you could tell teachers about inclusive education that you'd like teachers to know about it?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because I used to help families advocate with educators as well and with the school system. And I don't want to presume that I know anything about what teachers are up against. I mean, I think there's all sorts of pressures that we don't understand. But something I learned as a parent, and I think would be helpful for teachers to think about, historically, we've supported people with intellectual disabilities by thinking about how different they were, right? Everything has to be special. And these kids are so different and they need professionals and they need experts and they need all this different programming. And I think we have a lot of teachers who believe that, right? Because that's what they're being told, is that this is what is out there, and they don't feel like they're confident to provide inclusive education. They say, we're not trained for this, we don't know what to do. And it's overwhelming. And I think parents have been overwhelmed by that kind of messaging too, right? But what's helped me is when I realized my kid is just a kid, right? And I've done this before, right? I just have. And I think if teachers could think about that, these students are just students and they're more like your other students than they're different. And you know how to be teachers, right? You know how to modify curriculum and you know how to relate to your students and you know how to look for learning opportunities and you know how to break things down, right? You have the skills to do this. And I think that's really important because these kids who have intellectual impairments, they need those skills. They need good teachers, even more than other kids do. And I think if teachers could kind of realize that they've got something really valuable to bring to these kids' education, and they could do it, they can do it, right? I think that's an important lesson.
And I like what you said about how kids need good teachers, like students with disabilities, they need the same level of commitment to academics,
Yeah.
to, that all kids need, right? And so I think sometimes they end up weirdly getting less time with their teachers or less time. And that's the irony, right, that we're seeing. Okay, so in my experience, when I share my son's story, as someone with fairly like a disability in addition to complex medical issues, and then people will say, well, that might have worked for your kid, but it wouldn't work for my kid, right? Like inclusion works for him because say, oh, he likes to read. So inclusion works for him, but that wouldn't work for my kid. So what do we say? Because my belief is that inclusion works for all kids. So, but what do we say when families feel that way or that's been their experience?
Yeah. I mean, all kids are different, right? So, okay, Sam knows how to play the drums and that's a talent, but other kids have other talents. So I think you have to go with what your child's capable of. And I think you have to find that, and parents know what that is, right? You can get to know your kid and know what they're capable of. I always think of this as, this is a choice, right? Families have to make a choice early on. Either I'm going to buy into this idea that my kid belongs in some special world of disability, or I'm going to say, no, my child belongs in this world, right, that we're all living in and where my other kids grew up and lived in. And if you make that decision, right, that my child belongs in this world, then you do what you did with any of your other children, right? As you said about trying to find what is their place. Well, how do they fit into this world? Where do they do well? And, what do they need to what kind of preparation do they need, right? And if you've made that decision, then school's a big part of it, right? You can't have a non-inclusive school experience or some sort of really protective school experience, because that's not going to prepare you for the real world, right? So, it's always difficult. It's not that it's going to be easy, and it's not easy for any of our kids, like regardless of disability, of figuring out what's their place in the world. But they're going to live in it, so you have to do the work to figure out what that place is and help them get there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that, Donna. Such important words. I was wondering, Gordon, did you have any questions for Donna?
No,
Nope.
no, I'm fine.
Yeah, okay. All right. All right. I have one more then, before we move on. So you're just telling parents, and I'm going to build on that, parents that, we really think about what our kids are good at, what they like, and kind of build on that. So in closing then, so if we've got a parent on here and they're overwhelmed and inclusion is a far off dream for their child, like what would be one piece of advice? Maybe not like just one of them. There might be 10, but one that you would have.
Um, I think if parents are really struggling, um, we can get really bogged down in all the bureaucracy and what are IEPs and what's an IPRC, and this isn't fair, and this, why do I have to fight for this child when it was so easy with my other children? And you can get really bogged down in that. And there's things that, it's not that those things aren't important or we shouldn't, somebody should fight that fight, but I think the fight is distracting or the fight sometimes pulls us off what's really important. And what the language on an IPRC form is doesn't have a lot of bearing on my son's day-to-day experience, but people do, right? So I think it's really useful to find what works, who's working for your child, what works for your child, what's going well, and then just pour everything you've got into developing that, right? If it's one, if it's the bus driver, or if it's right, the administrative assistant at the school, who really likes your child and takes an interest, who sees them as just another kid in the school, and then run with that. Because I think that's something any parent can do. That doesn't feel like I need to understand the whole bureaucracy or I need to, be an expert advocate. It's just, what can you do on the ground for your one child? And that's probably going to have a great deal of impact for people. And it doesn't have to be a perfect situation, but it's going to make their day, each day better for them, each day more meaningful for them.
Wow, that's wonderful, Donna. I'm thinking, right as you said that was a shift for me as a parent. Is, you write a 3-page email every, in meetings. A lot of parents I talk to say, why do I always cry in these meetings or get a lump in my throat when I'm trying to advocate? And it's just because you just want people just to acknowledge your kid and what they deserve and their right to an education. You just want the basics, and not getting it is so frustrating. But in our family, things really shifted when we said, let's look around and see who wants this to happen, who's excited to work with our son Kieran, and who wants good things. And then you latch onto those people, and the other people might not come along for the ride, but it doesn't matter then, because you've got a pathway. It's about clearing that path, right? So yeah, very wise words. So thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
So moving on, we've got Andrew here tonight too, to talk to us about his family's experience with inclusion. So Andrew Bennett is a proud father whose journey through school and community life reflects the power of inclusion in action. His family's story highlights both the possibilities and the challenges of navigating complex systems, as we were just talking about, and why the work of Inclusion Saskatchewan is so vital. Andrew shares his perspective as a parent, board member, and advocate, reminding us of the ripple effect inclusion can have in our classrooms and communities. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you for coming to talk to us here tonight. And so we'll kind of follow a similar pattern there, starting off. If you could tell us a little bit about your child and her current school experience.
Sure. My wife and I have three kids. Our eldest daughter, Samara, who's 12, was born with a brain injury. And that brain injury, manifested in a variety of ways. She has cerebral palsy, so, she can't sit or stand on her own. She moves through her life in a wheelchair. She has epilepsy. She's non-speaking. She's tube fed. And I know like that sounds like a lot. But like, let me tell you, if you got to spend 15 minutes with her, you could start to see who she is. You wouldn't just see the disability, you'd see this sassy little 12-year-old girl who can just light up any room with a big grin. So I live in a small town in Saskatchewan. And when we started school, there was two schools in town. We went to see both of them. And we took her with us and we talked to them, and they were both all right. No, she's welcome at our school. Just we need to have some conversations about the support she needs, but we'll supply those. So we got started in preschool at 3. She's been, again, small town. She's been with the same classroom of kids since the age of 3. There's been a little bit of movement in and out of her class, but I'd say 80 to 90% of that class has known her most of their lives. So in terms of that school experience, all I can say is her classmates love her. Just like any other kid who's lovely. I don't know what it'd be like if she was a complete jerk. But in kindergarten, they had like the kindergarten teacher had to make a list for who got to push Sammy through the hallway at this recess or that. Like her classmates, she's always been part of their class, right? So they look at her as one of her classmates. They know she needs some help doing this or that, and they do that. And you just see it all the time when you go to the school. Like one time my wife came to the school, and all of a sudden, like around the corner comes Samara with one of her classmates driving her power chair at full speed, and they're both just having a great time. They're just being them. And that's like that to me is, one of the beautiful things. Can they make everything work with a 12-year-old girl in a power chair? Maybe not, but like, when they play floor hockey in gym, it's my daughter and her EA in goal. Next week, we're going skiing, and God only knows how that's going to go. But the ski hill has an adapted ski chair thing, and we're going to give it a try and see how it goes. That's maybe a little rambly.
No, it's
but
great.
but those are maybe some highlights.
Yeah, those are some pretty impressive highlights. So something that stood out to me as you were talking is, you were saying about the other students wanting to help Samara with her chair, push her chair, or, having fun, riding down the hall. And I have a memory of, like early on when my son first got his wheelchair, and we had, it was a Relay for Life activity at his school. And then I remember kind of trying to navigate this new situation. And then the kids just all took him. Like, he also has epilepsy, and took him, and they had a blast, like running around the track, and he was laughing, and it was this great day for him. And another memory I have is with his seizures, and they would ask what they can do to help. And so I would tell them, different things they could do to help him, even though he did have an EA with him. But they would, and I actually had the chance to teach him when he was in grade 12, and a lot of those same students were in his class. And it was really interesting to see how when he'd have a seizure, they would still help him, right? That was still in them. And so I'm kind of curious, like your thoughts on that, about the other student, that whole peer support. We call it peer support, but it's really friendship, right, that we're seeing. So I was just wondering if you had any other examples of that or thoughts on that.
Yeah. It it's hard to put into words because, like, again, they've they're 12 years old now. They've known each other since they were 3. Um, they're together. They know they belong together. Like that. It's one of the things where, like, as a parent, it's hard for me in that I I think, well, I feel like I almost know, like, her classmates see her disability as less than I do because that's just Sam.
Yeah.
They they had no expectations of anything other than this is who Sam is. This is who she will always be, and she's our classmate and our friend, and we do things with her. And, like, again, to them, it's like it doesn't an alternative doesn't make sense because that's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Like, last year, for February Inclusive Education Month in Saskatchewan, I had a request of the class because we had some rumblings in our province, and I wanted to ask the kids to, like, give their experience and what they would think if Sammy was not welcome in their classroom. Holy cow, let me tell you, did I ever bawl my eyes out when I read all those letters? Because, like, they don't understand. They like, why would you take away this person? She belongs with us as much as anyone else. It would make us sad if they took her away from us because, like, she's their friend. So, like, I don't know. It's a strange answer, I guess, maybe, but
Well, I think I've often thought, as a teacher in measuring the success of inclusion, say in my class or in my son's experience, it's that saying, we know you're included if you're missed when you're not there.
yeah.
That's what we're seeing. Sorry, did I freeze there? You guys
Just
froze
for
for me.
a couple seconds.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's that idea of being missed when you're not there, if that part got cut off. And so you've really captured that when you describe it. And we see, okay, research shows us inclusion benefits the other kids, but just on a parent, a friendship level, we know our kids are valued. We know that it is such an important thing for the rest of the class and the school. So you mentioned, Sammy started off right away, age 3, with her peers. And
Yep.
so for families who maybe didn't start that way, who, like, sorry, and this is sort of an organic question that came out of your story
All
but
good.
say your child hasn't been included and they're now 10. Do you have any advice on, like, so going back and thinking about that initial inclusion, is there any advice that you could give families on starting, say it's a bit later?
I don't know if I'd like, I don't have that experience. So I don't know if I'd have any advice with that specifically. Um, like, I know just from our perspective with Sammy when she was 3, how did we get started there even? Little by little, you know, when we first got into the school, okay, at that time her epilepsy wasn't super under control. So, you know, talking through our point man, the principal, how, like, we brought her to the gym, all the teachers came, we walked through, here's what you do if she has a seizure. Here's what you do if her G tube comes out. And that started, building that process. But, like, ultimately, it's everyone has to see who your kid is. I think, like, every parent knows every one of their children has something special that they bring to the table that's just them. And it's how can people get to know that? How can they get to see that person for who they are as a person and not be just like scared or not understanding a disability. So I don't know if that was a helpful
No, that
answer at
is
all, or
helpful.
if it was an answer at all.
No, it is because I think when you talked about like telling people what they need to do, you know, we and as parents, we always have to walk that line with respecting our child's privacy and you know those things that they might not want shared with what needs to be shared for them to be safe, right? And so when you touched on that, like I always sort of t would tell myself, if I don't answer people's questions or give them information, they'll make up their own answers, right? So, and that's risky for our kids. So we want to be, and then once people know what to do they are empowered. Like it's really interesting for me, if we do talk about seizures, to see a teacher or an EA during the first seizure, and I see the hand shaking because it is, you know, it's a lot. And then by the 10th, they're just like, just carrying on teaching the class. I always say you're like the flight attendant and everyone's watching you. And if you're calm, they know it's okay, right? So I think that was really insightful that any parent at any point when you're starting this journey, it's that, you know, deciding what information needs to be shared for your child to be safe and then like experience inclusion. So okay, one other question that actually has come into the comments there that I think could be really interesting here. So people are asking about academics. How does academics work? So say with Sammy, is it accommodated, modified programming? Like how is that working, the academics? Do you feel that it's working?
That is a very complicated question, and
Yeah.
I don't know how well I would answer other than, a, a, a huge challenge with us is that communication, just basic communication, and working to develop that so that like my wife and I can talk to her and we can kind of read her language, whether it's body language or kind of the sounds that she makes to say yes or no. But I don't have a great answer there other than we're working on things.
Yeah.
And
And that's okay, right? Like that we're always trying to figure out what is the priority right now, right? Or what is the valuable learning experience that we're having. So yeah, that's a tough question, and I just kind of popped that one on you, but it popped in. It's come into the chat, and I guess I could answer too from my son's experience. Is sometimes things were modified and sometimes accommodated, and you know, according to like certain things like say math far more challenging than English, right? So, and that's the same for really lots of learners, and how we would accommodate that. And then, you know, sometimes like another question that's been asked, and maybe we can all address it at the end, is people are saying, what if my kid doesn't have a one-to-one EA? How does learning work? And that's really common to not have a one-to-one EA. And how does it look? So that's an important question. Maybe we can kind of think about that and maybe at the end address that. Okay, thank
Andrea, I do just want to comment on Andrew's, what I picked up from his sharing about his experience is really important that parents have the confidence to work with people and take the risk of not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, but willing to do that anyway. And I think that's a very important part of making inclusion work, because if you trust people and you know they're going to do their best, then give it a try, see how it goes. If it doesn't go as though you thought, make some changes, like what you're describing that you're going to do next week on the ski trip. And I think that's a really important thing. Many people think that there's a prescribed list of exactly what you need to do to make sure everything goes successfully. And my experience is that's not really what happens. It's much more people acting in good faith, working together, collaborate, and make one decision at a time and do the best they can. And if everybody trusts, you know, if parents trust the teachers trust the parents, and it's not a conflictual relationship, that can work really well. And I hear that coming through in your
if I can
comments.
riff on that for 45 seconds. Exactly. Like right from the start, when we were given the basic lessons on basic how to deal with medical emergencies, we told them right there and then, here's what you do. As long as you do your best and are acting in good faith and trying to do the best for Sam, we are never going to come after you. You're never going to have us yell at you. Do your best. Same with like, can kids drive her wheelchair? Are there going to be a crash or two? Absolutely. But again, as long as everyone's working together, trying to work in good faith, they're not driving her through heavy traffic. They're just there might be a bump in the hallway. We're okay. Try things, act in good faith. We're not going to be cranky about that.
Try things and act in good faith. There we go. Those are excellent, excellent words to live by on this journey. Thanks a lot, Andrew, for all of that and sharing that with us. So next we're going to talk to Martha. So Martha Walls is parent to Quinn, who is 12 years old and has Down syndrome. Martha and her husband Corey live in Halifax. Until recently, they have struggled to secure the supports Quinn needs at school, but largely owing to the support of Inclusion Nova Scotia and Inclusive Education Canada, the family's feeling much more optimistic about Quinn's educational future. And so that kind of speaks to what Gordon just said as well about that, the confidence to try things, but also the support, right? That we need that. So welcome, Martha. Thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your story and Quinn's story. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Quinn and her educational journey.
Sure. Thanks very much for having me. And it's so lovely, I have to say, to hear the positive stories from Donna and Andrew, because we're relatively new in our educational experience. And I'll just share a little bit about our background, because it is slightly unique, I guess, although all stories are unique. But so my little girl name is Quinn, and she's 13 years old almost. And she has Down syndrome. One of the biggest challenges for Quinn in school has had less to do with her intellectual disability than it has to do with her medical needs and her medical vulnerabilities. So Quinn, although she is currently in grade 8, currently in grade 6, she is a kid who has only probably attended school for about 2 years in total. And that's because Quinn was first forced out of school with the start of the pandemic in 2020, which was a really scary time for our family. And that's because Quinn has an extreme susceptibility to viruses. So prior to the pandemic, she'd been hospitalized like 8 times in the ICU on a ventilator. And so with the arrival of COVID, we were really desperate to keep Quinn as safe as possible. And ever since 2020, we've struggled with our local Center for Education to put into place processes that would give her both the one-on-one support she needs in school and the medical protections that her doctors have insisted on to keep her as safe as possible from viruses. And so our most recent struggle started when masks came off in school, and when Quinn's physicians were recommending that school staff continue to wear masks to work with her one-on-one. So she's a kid who needs quite a lot of day-to-day needs, has quite a lot of day-to-day needs, needs a lot of support, with toileting and all of that stuff. And so it was quite, our physicians quite strongly recommended that those folks who are working really in close proximity with her, that they would be willing to wear a mask. And so for 4 years, our Center for Education denied their duty to accommodate Quinn's medically documented needs, which meant that really Quinn had no safe way to attend school. And it was just last year that we had a real breakthrough. And that was with, as you intimated, with the help of Inclusion Nova Scotia and Inclusion Education Canada. We were able to secure from our Center of Education recognition of their duty to accommodate Quinn in school. And in January of 2025, Quinn went back to school for her grade 5 year. And that accommodation continues this year. Quinn's in grade 6. She's in her first year at junior high. And we're really thrilled about her return to classes and return to school. She's making progress. She's making up for lost time. She's loving school. And thanks to the safety precautions that we now have embedded in her daily schedule, Quinn's not been ill. She's been able to maintain her good health and hasn't been hospitalized, knock on wood. So, we're really, really excited about where Quinn is right now. And it's been a long time coming, but we're really thrilled.
Wow, that's a pretty incredible story there, Martha, and so relieved to hear that she's in school and thriving. So, knowing it's been a relatively short time that she's been in school, though, can you think of like one example? It could be like a lesson she participated in or an outing, any sort of example of something that you thought was a really rich experience for her?
One of the great things that's happened, even when the Center for Education wasn't willing to put into place kind of formal ways of Quinn to access her schooling, we always had incredible teachers and incredible educators who were willing to kind of develop informal ways for Quinn to stay connected to her classmates and to her classroom and school life. And so we had teachers who, like on their own, without having any kind of obligation to do so, developed opportunities for Quinn to join her peers online, for story time or to play games. Whenever there was an outside field trip, like we went skating last winter at the local skating oval, they orchestrated ways for Quinn to be involved in that. And so for us, that was a really important way for Quinn to maintain connections to her classmates, even though like the formal structure of her school day wasn't there. And really that meant really the world to us to have that kind of support and to know that these teachers were offering that support, quite outside of what was kind of mandated for them to do. So all of that was wonderfully moving. The kids would, fight with each other about who got to spend time online with Quinn each day, reading books with her and that sort of thing. And so Quinn was able to strike some really, I think, some lasting and deep friendships with kids that are now kind of coming to fruition in day-to-day life and as she's back in school. So that was a really incredible way that, through some ingenuity and through some willingness to kind of take some risks, teachers were able to help us maintain those connections, even when, day-to-day attendance wasn't possible for so long. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if you could say, based on your experience, and this was a really challenging advocacy journey, right? As you've described, what is something, because I know there's lots of parents who are on that journey. What's some advice you could give to parents who really want what Quinn now has and that feels unattainable?
Um, I think one of the most important things is just not to give up. I mean, we were really after about year 2 of just hitting obstacle after obstacle. We were really at a point where my husband and I were quite like we didn't know where to turn, we didn't know what to do. And so we reached out to Inclusion Nova Scotia, and that really was the tipping point for us. Not only did they give us sort of guidance in how to work with the system and use processes that were there, but they also gave us, incredible moral support, just that energy to keep going. So, if you can just muster the strength and to keep at it, eventually something will give. And if you can find support people, whether it be something like Inclusion Nova Scotia or, just a friend who can come to meetings with you to kind of be an impartial observer, whatever you need to keep going, just keep at it. And that's, I know it's easier said than done. But I'm so glad we didn't give up. At one point, the Center for Education proposed that we homeschool. And we rejected that. We thought we're not equipped to do this. This is not what we want for our child. We almost, we got to the point where we thought might be our only option. And we just thought, okay, let's just give it one more shot. And I'm so glad we did. So really stay at it. And someone mentioned earlier about the importance of kind of finding what works and go with it. We've also realized that, sometimes you're not going to have, educators who maybe are as on your side as you want. We found rather than kind of push directly against those folks who might be a little bit in the way, that it's much more effective to work with those folks in the system who are willing to support you, who are willing to work with you, because we found that those other folks kind of find their way out of the picture, and you get much better results. And so this has been something that's been a really useful lesson for us to learn, is rather than kind of throw a hissy fit and get really angry at search situations that aren't working, ally yourself with the folks who are committed and interested in helping you with your whatever the obstacle of the day is. And that's been a really helpful thing for us as well.
Thanks, Martha. So a question that I had regarding that. So I know in our conversation you had said that Quinn is having a very positive experience with her current teacher. And I'm wondering, so for parents who are kind of thinking about this, or maybe there's a teacher or two on here, what would you say to teachers or about this connection? Like, about what is this teacher doing that is working so well for Quinn?
I think meeting Quinn where she is, and working to her strengths. We had a scenario this school year that was one where, when Quinn first went to school, we kind of we were working with an educator that was maybe not as on board as we wanted that educator to be. At one point, they recommended that that Quinn was awfully sleepy. She wasn't very engaged. She didn't seem to be, the school day was not something that seemed to be really captivating her. And so that at one point they requested we maybe send a pillow in so that Quinn could rest. And we were a little worried, that she would be, spending her day sleeping. And that teacher wasn't, we were a little worried that teacher was not maybe as willing or maybe even able to engage with Quinn, who, like other kids here we're talking about today, is largely nonverbal, and so it takes a little bit of effort to kind of make a connection. But that teacher, again, what we kind of employed that strategy of not necessarily like having it out with that teacher, but just working with others in the school who were more attuned to Quinn's needs. And within a few weeks, we found Quinn working with a new teacher. And that new teacher, who was obviously finding ways to connect with Quinn, made a difference immediately. Like, before this switch had happened in the classroom, my husband, I noticed that, she seems more animated. She seems perkier. And one day the bus driver said, she seems really, she's chatting the whole way home from school. Like, she seems really like she's really enjoying school these days. And then we realized that she, in fact, had a new teacher, and on all of it, we don't know exactly what was happening that was different at school, but obviously a connection had been made. And we stopped getting reports about Quinn being sleeping at school, and instead we started to get reports about how engaged she was, how she was talking with all her peers and greeting them in the hallway. And then a few weeks ago, that pillow was sent home from school. And so it really wasn't, we think, a really concerted effort on the part of one of the teachers at the school to work with and make a connection with Quinn where she is. I know the big development this week is Quinn's getting her nails done at school. This teacher has fingernails, and my daughter's quite taken by them. And so she's found ways to really engage and to make the day something that Quinn is excited about all day long. So that's been a really positive experience for us too, is just finding the teacher who is willing to kind of make those connections and engage your kid where the kid is at. And it's a little difficult for Quinn because, she's lost a lot of time. She's got a lot of ground to make up. And so I think that teacher is kind of thinking outside of the box and developing and using activities that really kind of capture her. So it's been a really wonderful experience to see really Quinn blossom this school year, and we're really grateful for educators who are willing to do that, kind of think outside of the box and to connect with this kid where she's at, and really work with her to find what interests her in school. So.
Wow, that's great. There's something very visual to me about the pillow coming home.
Yeah.
That it's like no more napping.
Yeah.
We're learning, and that does speak to one of the questions somebody had about academics and our kids, especially like, we're all describing our kids, even though we have all had inclusive experiences for our children, they've all been at different points. There's been challenges. It does disrupt learning, and we know that, but as long as we can get back on track, it's always that slippery slope. So the pillow was a slippery slope, and then it does show that if you can get back on track, success can be had. So yeah, very powerful image, that coming home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're full of hope right now, and really anticipating, great things for Quinn's academic future. So we're in a really happy space right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Martha.
I'd appreciate each of the of our panelists sharing their thoughts about accommodations that really make a difference for your child, and from the point of view that schools and teachers who are still thinking in a very special education way consider accommodations very technical, very formal, very organized, all, written down, followed to the T. And I'm just wondering whether that plays out with what you see actually works with your child, or is it the more informal accommodations that a teacher who knows your child and interacts and makes decisions in the moment that seem to make sense, that modify, accommodate, like between those two, what kind of accommodations have you found work best with your child? Is it the formality of very specific accommodations, or the more in the moment kind of things that someone who has learned who your child is able to do? I'd be interested in your experience with that. Martha, how about you?
Oh yeah, I would say absolutely. It's the informal, ways of connecting with my child that's been so important. Because if she's not engaged, she's not going to be, she's not going to get from school what she needs to get from school. And so those teachers who have been willing to kind of meet her where she is, and to work, and academically she's quite a bit behind her peers right now, but that doesn't matter, right? She's there, she's engaged, she's in the classroom now. I think we had a meeting just this week where they noted that she's in the classroom most of the time now, which is a huge change. And that's because they're working with her in ways that engage her. She's able to be in the classroom and to be involved, and she wants to be there. And it is absolutely the informal elements of her day that's allowing that to happen. Absolutely. Yeah.
Donna, in Ontario, there's a very strong need to define that the child has special needs, and that they are laid out in I think it's IPRC. You might share what that is for people that don't live in Ontario.
Oh, yes.
But the same question to you, like, do the written formal accommodations make the biggest difference, or is it, like Martha said, the more informal with your child?
I think it's informal. So in IPRC, now I have to get it right. So Identification Placement Review Committee. So it's where they identify the exceptionality is the term they use here, and then they talk about placement, right? So where is the student going to get education? So accommodations and modifications, like we have both with Sam, and they're formal and some informal. But where I see this difference between formal and informal is in the assessment. So we've had, it's a very interesting barrier or like mind shift with teachers to get them to think about, Sam isn't going to write down what he's learned, or he's not going to answer your question directly when you want an answer. He's going to show you something he learned 3 weeks from now, and maybe he's going to show me, and then I have to communicate with the school and say, he's doing this, like, what does this mean? So we went through a phase where he was pointing out every single hydro pole he saw, and he was super excited, and he kept saying school and showing me that, and I was like, what is he talking about? And then I found out, well, he was doing a unit on electricity. And so he was telling me, well, hydro poles carry the electricity. So it's been the assessment, and some of the teachers, that's such a barrier in their thinking about, well, we need this formal assessment. And if we can't get him to prove what he knows the way it needs to be done, then he doesn't know it, right? So that's where the informal, like when we've got teachers who are more open to say, okay, we're just observing. And his current teacher has said a couple times, we're inferring a lot about what he knows. And you can tell that makes him cringe. Like we're having to infer what he knows. And I'm like, yeah, you have to infer what he knows. He's not going to write it down for you, right? So yeah, when you get that, okay, let's just do the way that it works for them. Let's just help them the way it works for them, I think is much more helpful. Writing down a bunch of stuff, is another whole layer.
Andrew?
So I'd say for Samara, it's a little bit of a mix, but the formal accommodations are pretty simple in that like she needs a full-time EA because of her medical needs. So that's easy and obviously has to be formal so that, the school hires and employs an EA. Almost everything else is just, I would say, once the teacher and the EA are aligned on like, hey, we want this kid in our classroom. We want to give her the best chance of success. It just kind of happens naturally. And like we talk about things every time she starts in a new classroom, like, okay, so Sam has a visual impairment and she can hear very well. So like as an example, hang some little drapes underneath the bright fluorescent lights or the whole class, she'll have her eyes closed. We don't have to write that down anywhere. We just say it and everyone along the path is like, all right. And like with, having very acute hearing and relying on our hearing, if a teacher really, for whatever reason, wanted to make loud and sudden sounds all the time, it would scare the crap out of my daughter. But like, we've never had a teacher who wants to scare the crap out of her. And if they did, I'm sure her classmates would be like, hey, this is bugging Sammy, like knock it off. So mostly informal. But again, that shared vision of like what this should look like. What are we all trying to, pull our oars and get to the same place?
Something I would like to add there is something that has worked well for us is I made sure that whenever my son started a new year with a new teacher or started a new class in high school, that I was really clear with his teacher that they're his teacher and they do his programming and the EA helps facilitate that because sometimes the risk is, if the EA kind of takes over that, then it becomes very exclusionary, right? Because then you're going out to do this new, different work. And so to make sure that the teacher's planning, because if the teacher's thinking about what the class is doing and how that's going to be accessible for my son, right? Then he's getting the teacher's accountable to him and his learning, right? So I found that was always more successful. And I'm glad Andrew mentioned the light covers. My son also has a visual impairment, and the light covers were very helpful. So there's sort of the academic accommodations and then the environmental accommodations. And then the students in his class would sometimes say they also liked the light covers because those fluorescent lights are hard on everybody. So there's an example, right, of an accommodation that helps everybody. So. Well, we're at our time, and a few questions have popped into the chat, but I think we covered most things. I think we could probably do another webinar to address some of the specific questions about academics and accommodations. So maybe we'll have to do a follow-up. We'll see there. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and really appreciate this. And I hope it was helpful to the families who joined us tonight and listened in. And your time is so valued. We really appreciate it, Donna, Martha, and Andrew. So thank you very much.
And I want to thank Andrea for putting this panel together. Thanks to each of them. And remind you that February is National Inclusive Education Month. We follow the things that are being posted on our social media. and keep up the good fight for including our kids in school. That's what Inclusive Education Canada was developed for and why Inclusion Canada supports us. So thank you all. And remember, this has been recorded and will be posted on our website. So anybody who might be interested, who says they missed the session, they'll be able to check it out within a short time on the Inclusive Education Canada website. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.